we hope, in an ideal world, the action will speak. It will give us, what we ask for. This is very different. There's a degree of separation. Part of that is because organ, but part of it is also because of this interface. I'm Kevin Komisaruk. I'm an organist and professor at the University of Toronto. This is Organist Launchpad. I think we need to be really honest with ourselves that the context for organ is changing. The context for organ performance is changing, whether it's on stage or in liturgy. By extension, the contexts for studying organ are changing. The contexts for building organs are changing. The context for composing for organ is changing. And in the midst of this change, we have different options in terms of how we can respond to these changes. We can respond with curiosity. Curiosity gives us the inspiration to innovate. So an innovation response to change is one posture that we can take. We can deny that the change is happening. We can retreat into that space of pretending that what we're seeing is not actually unfolding in front of us. We can also choose to adopt more of a preservationist posture to change. So we can try to focus on the past, on what used to be, and try to keep that alive. And there's a lot of noble intention behind that kind of posture, that we want to respect what has come before us and we want to keep it alive. But there's some pitfalls with that because it can sort of retreat into a fear space where we're afraid of change. So preserving history is a little bit different from being afraid of change. So finding a space in there is pretty important. We have as well technology in front of us, around us, behind us, and technology contextualizes change to some degree. And for me, virtual organ is a way to embrace technology from the posture of curiosity and innovation. What can we do to explore the expressive and creative range of the instrument at the same time as we step into the reality of the changes that we're seeing in front of us? One of the real advantages I see to virtual organ technology, and I'll explain a little more what that means, is that it allows us to address some of the significant barriers to access that exist in organ. And so I'm going to take a few minutes here just to speak a little bit about what that means and how virtual organ can help us address and challenge some of those barriers. In my 20 or so years as a prof in organ, I've met a lot of organists, obviously. And I would say for every 10 organists, there are about 9 of them who have said to me, I wish I could access the instruments. I wish I could get practice time. I wish I could have more hours. I wish I could play that instrument. I'm getting just as much or more frustration around access as I am passion about the instrument. So this is really key. When we're talking about the future of organ or the future of our instrument, we need to be really brutally honest with ourselves about what is the reality of people's lives when they try to play organ, and what have we constructed around us as a community of practice that impacts how people feel they can become involved in organ and whether they see themselves reflected in the organ community. So let's think about barriers to access such as geography. Right? We need to travel to get to some instruments. They're not readily accessible many times. We need to step on a plane to get to these organs, right? We need to be able to afford to get on a plane. Maybe we need to be able to afford practice time to access instruments. So this is potentially a barrier. I'm not saying that those barriers aren't logical or they're always avoidable, but they're also real. And they're also presenting themselves to people who may be otherwise very curious in the instrument, may be very latently talented with the instrument, intuitive, apt artists who really want to express themselves through organ, but never get that chance to make contact with it because of these barriers. One of the arenas of barriers to access that interests me is also the cultural element. We have a culture of organ, right? And that culture sometimes forms around identities, belief systems, spiritual belief systems, economic communities. We have established a field, a discipline, where we expect that an organist looks a certain way, talks a certain way, believes certain things. And it's on the basis of how those individuals present themselves that we will sometimes make decisions about whether they are organists or whether they belong, whether they should be given access to an instrument. Now, if we back up and think that maybe some of us are in a fear or preservation posture around protecting the organ because of how much we love it and are passionate about it, then maybe we are thinking in terms of how can we limit access? How do we need to gatekeep access so that the right people get through? But the problem with that is that none of that has anything to do with artistry. It has nothing to do with talent. It has nothing to do with latent ability. I'm in the business as a teacher of trying to scout talent, always on the lookout for brilliance. I operate personally, pedagogically, on a presumption of competence and aptitude in artists. And so that means I'm looking for signs of life. Where are the lights on? Where's the curiosity? Where's the spark? And I find consistently in my work that there are individuals who have that curiosity and spark about organ. They may not look like organists that we've had working in the field for the last few decades, but that doesn't mean that that interest isn't there. There's a big difference between a lack of individuals who are part of a community and a lack of individuals who are interested in the organ. So we need to decide how, in what ways, can we deconstruct barriers to access. I've seen examples of individuals talking about passionately about how much they love the instrument in their church, for example, and they're speaking in front of the instrument. And at the same time, in the background, you can see the console of the instrument, and there's a rope around it. So we say that we want people to approach the organ. We want them to feel involved. We want to welcome them. But we need to be very mindful of the messages that we may be sending sometimes about do not touch, or you need to be like this in order to belong. I find that virtual organ technology completely removes this from the equation, because we're decoupling organ from the physical spaces. In the process of decoupling organ from the physical spaces in which they were created, we also create an opportunity to decouple organ from all of these expectations that we've constructed around who is an organist, who belongs. I'm not suggesting any of this is intentional. I know that all of us have really good intentions to keep organ alive and to create access points and on-ramps for people to express their curiosity in the instrument. When we open up the floodgates, whether it's through virtual organ technology or an acoustic instrument, we open up the possibility that individuals are going to play in a way that we don't expect. They might do things with the instrument that are different, that are innovative, that are unique, but it might not make us feel comfortable. It's possible that an individual, when they begin to engage the organ on their own terms, that they'll explore it on their own terms. And that means expressing their creative individuality on their own terms, with the organ as a tool. I see the organ as a tool for creative expression. I see virtual organ as an accessible tool for creative expression, one that has advantages and disadvantages like every tool does. Some tools are better for certain jobs than others. It doesn't mean that we're going to throw out the hammer because we need a screwdriver. It means that we need to understand the benefits of a certain tool and explore its full creative and practical application. But what happens when individuals engage a tool on their own terms is they start to do things with that tool that are perhaps surprising to us, or that explore the tool, explore the interface in a way that is different. Creative process is not always a pretty process. And so if we're going to facilitate access to the organ through the digital, through the virtual interface, we need to understand that there's going to be a very broad range of creative output that comes up as a result. A key piece here is that we view virtual organ technology as an additional tool in our arsenal to build interest and proficiency and to encourage curiosity with organ, as opposed to a replacement for acoustic instruments. As I'm going to say in some further chapters here, I think it's important for us to realize that organ is a different kind of instrument from any other acoustic instrument, but also virtual organ is an additional kind of organ, completely different, that requires its own approach to maximize its creative and expressive potential. For this production, I had a great opportunity to work with two performance students in piano who didn't have a lot of experience with the organ. It was really fascinating to observe the discoveries they made about their repertoire because they were playing it on the organ, using the virtual interface. And specifically the observations they made about harmonic rhythm and texture, I think were especially interesting. Shen, Dane, thank you very much for coming and doing this and being involved in this moment of discovery with the virtual instrument. I'm just interested to get some of your first impressions playing piano repertoire. You're both piano performers. You're used to the energy, the rhythmic energy, the percussion, that sort of tonal depth that you get from a piano action, and interacting with the instrument in that way. Your palette of color comes from the body. It comes from how you move weight, manipulate gravity and balance and all of those elements to create the sound that you want. Have either of you ever played an organ before?
No, really.
Okay, so this is new both in terms of the fact that organ has much more of a binary response profile when we're playing electrified kinds of actions like this. We have mechanical actions which have a mechanical direct linkage between the key and the pipe, which affords you more control and detail and nuance in how the pipe is allowed to speak, for how long, and timing releases and coordinating those releases between other voices and polyphony. With this kind of electrified action, whether it's digital or any other kind of electric interface in the action, we have very much a binary on or off. It's a switch because it's a physical switch. So the currency of expression is so much around timing. It's around making your listener wait for what it is that you're trying to do. So you create emphasis through hesitation. By building hesitation, you build expectation in your listener. And then by articulating past the point they expect to hear something, you manipulate an impression of intensification. So that's our language in organ. So that's going to be new, and it won't necessarily be unique to this kind of digital kind of interface. But what I'd first like to get you to do is just to play this beautiful Debussy piece you've chosen, Shannon, and try to look beyond the fact that the keys will feel so light because we're using a MIDI controller. You're not in your instrument, your arena that you're used to, and let's focus on what you're hearing. Okay? Okay, let's start. Jump in whenever you're ready. Okay, okay. First impressions.
Yeah, it's a bit hard to feel the control. I kind of lost my control, and I realized that I relies on my pedal so much, and here I kind of feel helpless.
Aha, okay. Dana, your observations? Just
Yeah, I was looking at her hands and how she has to hold onto every note the whole time, which we're really not used to. We're so reliant on our feet. Like what she
on your
said.
feet to keep the
sustain.
sostenuto. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's variables here that are relevant to the fact that this is organ versus piano, and then there are variables that are relevant to the fact that this is virtual versus acoustic in terms of an instrument. So some of what you're experiencing just has to do with moving to organ, and how do we keep this lyricism that is so much a part of what it is that you're trying to do here with an instrument that is so instantaneously responsive to the release and doesn't give you anything beyond what the space, the physical space gives you. This is a sample of Salisbury Cathedral. So it's a very large and rich acoustic. So there's a lot of support in terms of keeping the sound rolling. But what it demands from you, as you see, is this effect of lingering much more on the key. So why don't you just try the right hand and try to salvage what you're trying to go for at the piano with this action that feels initially probably quite limiting, in terms of expression, right? So you want to stick your hand on the key. Keep it there as long as you dare, and you want to really join elements that you feel are lyrically connected physically much more than you would on a piano. Let's try that. Just the right hand. Okay, it's very different.
Yeah.
What do you think? Your impression?
I think actually the fact that it doesn't decay as much as the piano makes me aware of the way certain notes rub against each other more, like the coloring slightly differently than if we were to play it on the piano.
And just use the
Just use the-
sostenuto
right.
to keep it, to do that work in
Yeah.
a way.
What do you think?
What do you think? Yeah.
when I play on piano, even I'm using the tenuto pedal, I'm still trying to hear the dying of the sound. But here I don't have it.
You don't have that.
Yeah.
So can I share some impression that I had between those two versions that you just played? Then the second version, from creating more sound and more contact with your hand, I heard some interesting things come out of the music. One is a difference between the lyric element, the melodic element in the line. Number two is the harmony of the line became more clear. As you're holding onto it, we're actually hearing it more. So it's creating more of a clear statement of the harmonic melody of this line. And secondly, a distinction between what is impressionistic and what is thematic. So what you have here is a very clear thematic outline, and we have a clear sense of what that melody is. We have a clear sense of what the harmony is doing. But then we have this cool sort of do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do. Now you brought that out and you played it less rhythmically rigid. So you created a kind of a flexibility in that. So it was a little bit, it wasn't measured, it wasn't part of some sort of polyphonic structure, it was an impressionistic effect, right? So we had two of them, and so what happened was those impressionistic effects rhythmically became a little freer in the way that you played those. And so you have this larger pulse, this larger tempo with the line, but then we have a little more texture. So it's an interesting effect. We discover something about the music through that. You show that to us in your interpretive effect. Is that something that you do when you play the piano, when you play this piece on piano? Do you draw the distinction between the line, what is melodic, what is harmonic, and what is impressionistic in this way? Or is this something that you just did spontaneously?
I guess every time I don't really play it exactly the same, but basically I'll do the similar thing.
Okay, great, yeah. So could you try it once more?
Yeah.
Now that those things are really in the fore, add the left hand and try to give us a sense of those different elements here.
It's hard to do it.
It is very hard to do, so you really want to just have your hand glued on the key and drop the notes out you need to, and
I'll do my best.
yeah, I know, you're doing great. This is interesting. Is there anything about playing this piece on organ that impacts how you see this piece of music?
I feel the harmonies are even more obvious for me because they're just like adding on to each other instead of like playing one and they died away and then I play the next one.
That's very interesting. So what you're saying is like a clarity in the texture of the harmony that emerges because of the fact that it doesn't evaporate.
It's more like easy for me to hear the continuous of the harmonies.
Do you think? Can you think of any other similar environment where you might make a similar discovery, an instrumental texture or an ensemble texture with different instruments or other musicians where you might experience that same kind of effect?
Like a singer?
Oh yeah, like a
choir.
like a choir, like a choir, yeah. So we have that same kind of breath behind it.
Or winds instrument. I think, yeah.
So I think breath and wind is very much part of the dialogue of how we describe organ music. And it's one of the things that is so valuable in working with organ is that it has that breath and that presence that sort of makes the music approach us more clearly.
Yeah.
We can see more of what's there. And organ writing is very often designed to build on that effect. So these elements are very present.
Yeah.
And so it's beautiful work. Thank you very, very much. Should we move to some Chopin? Okay. So we're going to change some registrations.
I think maybe I could change to like a Scarlatti slow piece.
Sure.
Which will fit probably better.
Sure. That's great. That sounds great to me. I'm just curious to know if there's anything that you feel, Shen, that you might take from having done this when you sit down at a piano. Do you think it might shape you in any way? Thinking about organ when you're playing piano, when you're playing this piece on the piano? Or is it just to you, does it feel like a total gear shift and a totally different thing?
No, I think it really helps me to feel the harmony progression. And it doesn't really help me feel the different layers, but it reminds me to do even more layer things when I go back to piano.
All right, that's great to hear. Thanks. All right, so some Scarlatti for sure. Yeah, great. I'm going to make some changes to the registration. We'll try it again with a very different sound.
It's a lot thicker than I'm used to, for sure. There was a bit of a delay in the attack, so it was a bit of a change of listening as well. So it almost felt like I wanted things to come a little ahead, but I just needed to adjust my thinking and my listening.
So you adapt to the feedback that you're getting from the instrument. Do you do that when you're playing an acoustic instrument too?
Yes, but I think there's a certain expectation of how a piano goes.
We hope.
Yeah.
In an ideal world,
Yeah.
the action will speak.
Yeah.
It will give us, what we ask for.
Right.
I'm sure you have that experience, both of you, of having instruments that gave you more of what you asked for, and certain instruments that made you work harder than others to get you what you're asking for, to give you what you're asking for. This is very different. There's a degree of separation. It could be quite disorienting. Part of that is because organ, but part of it is also because of this interface that we have a MIDI controller instead of working with mechanical components that are not physically opening the pipe. And then we also have a latency variable here, although it's very low, introduced through this virtual platform. So let's change the registration a little bit, and I'm just going to take out all of this. I'm going to take out all of this 8-foot material, and I'm going to just do this and this, and we're going to try this. Now this is going to be considerably higher in the octave, but that's fine. One of the real effects, one of the real one of the real benefits of working with organ is the ability to play and layer color. And so very often that involves playing outside of 8-foot pitch. So middle C is not middle C is an octave higher, and we transpose things higher for the purpose of creating color, sometimes for the purpose of creating lightness, because, as you say, we have this element of thickness sort of hardwired into the instrument that we want to be aware of. And certain organs have more of that than others. This is an English instrument, an English cathedral instrument, which tends towards modeling choral sounds and tends towards fuller sounds and darker effects. So we have to sometimes work a little harder to get very light effects, whereas some earlier styles of instrument building were inherently much lighter. So it's just a different style of organ construction. But here, let's try it. Same thing. And let's see what happens now when we do this. And sort of try to respond intuitively when you feel that the change in the color or the timbre or the texture impacts some performance decisions you might make about articulation or tempo or phrasing. Very different.
Yeah, different. I think it suits it better.
You think so? So what did you discover about that?
I like the transparency of this one.
Okay.
You're able to hear, I mean, the texture's a little light, so you're able to hear sort of everything. I felt like the one before was almost like a little chocolate cake. There was a lot going on.
A roast, plate of roast beef. This is...
Yeah, this is the right aesthetic, I suppose.
Aha, okay. So I noticed very strong changes in how you interpreted that in this registration. With this registration, 4-foot flutes only, there's an element of lyricism you brought out here that I thought allowed you to stretch time a little bit in some interesting ways. What do you think?
I feel very different characters between the two times. This like completely different characters because of the sounds, different sounds, and.
So there's that sort of feedback loop that is introduced in the change of the sound. The sound change triggers in us a response to the instrument that makes us want to do things differently with the music to create more expression, to bring more out of it. So you were seemed to be drawn in by that. I found you taking beautiful liberties in shaping in the right hand, so that created this sort of lyric effects, a little more generosity in the timing. Hesitation, expressive effects that were very beautiful there. I also thought some interesting intuitive responses in your left hand. Did you notice that?
Yeah, I think the harmony's just the way, maybe it's the way it's voiced when I listen to it on the piano versus here. It's different, so I think when I hear the way the chord sounds on an instrument like this, and especially you don't get that kind of richness on a piano. So certain chords just kind of spoke differently to me. Yeah.
But they impacted how you actually attacked the key. Did you notice that you arpeggiated some of your left hand chords? So that was something that, are you a harpsichordist as well? I don't recall.
I don't study it.
Okay, but you've played harpsichord?
I've listened a lot to harpsichordic interpretations of it.
So this idea of trying to extend, accentuate rhythmic accent, or create articulation to lengthen the time that we're hearing the onset of an attack.
Right.
that you respond intuitively to that. But that was triggered by the registration change. So it's interesting,
Yeah.
you know, how the sound feedback impacts what we do in response.
Sure.
I don't know, does this impact anything you think about how you might respond to piano? Do you think that there's anything here in the language of this instrument that might shape you on your home instrument? I don't know. There's no right answer.
Right.
What do you think?
I think it's mostly using time as a, I guess, primary source of expression here. I just felt like I was able to or encouraged to do more of it here because the other parameters don't exist, like the dynamics.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
instance, and maybe even like the precision of the articulation that I'm used to.
I see.
So I think I was wired to think slightly differently on here. So I wonder if I practiced this piece on the organ for a prolonged period of time, then I think I could have a better answer of how I might change. So it'd be interesting to experiment.
Yeah, I think one of the things I love about working with pianists when we work with organ is how it seems to trigger thinking around process, interpretive process, because of the nature of this instrument, both its inherent features, as you say, there's we don't have that dynamic range, we have a very different currency of expression that centers around timing, and you know, this way that it though impacts how we think about just paying attention to what we're getting back. So much, I think, of performance is very much oriented towards what we do to the instrument, and we're playing at it, instead of maintaining a very receptive posture and being sensitive to what is the feedback from the instrument, what is the feedback from the space of the instrument, what does it trigger in our imagination, what does it trigger in our awareness, especially around things like harmony. Well, thank you so much for your time and for jumping in so courageously. It's great to work with you. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you for this.
Yeah. So you notice with Shen, this sort of surprise, it's totally different from what she expects to hear. So there's a few factors relevant here. Some of them have to do with the virtual interface, and some of them just have to do with the fact that it's organ as opposed to piano. The difference in the action response, the difference in the sound, the difference in the sustain of the attack, the need to apply the hand physically to the keyboard to produce that sustain, the lack of sostenuto pedal. All of these things trigger this very disorienting experience that you can really see unfold in this footage, where the artist is trying to process the experience. So the first approach is to try to recreate what existed on the piano and to apply what this artist knows about piano to this different interface. But she quickly finds that it's impossible to do that. And so what we need to do instead is take a different approach. So there's two important key pieces here that I think are really valuable to observe. One of them is that the organ triggers a broader awareness about music that has direct bearing on the kinds of attention and sensitivity that is developed in the artist when they return to the piano. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to simply have the experience of a completely different sound environment that allows the training of the artist to recede and allow something more fresh and immediate and personal to surface as the artist engages the instrument and their music to try to find something that is personal. And you see that with Dane in the Scarlatti. When Dane moves from the thick registration that we started to this very heavy, thick registration, you can sort of feel his frustration that the music isn't moving. There isn't that mobility, that agility that he's used to having on the piano. So immediately moving to the pure 4-foot registration with everything coupled allows this transparency, this lightness to emerge. But you also hear that he responds very intuitively, even on this very small, very light touch MIDI controller. There's nothing especially heavy or responsive about this MIDI controller. It's a plastic key, it's very light, but you hear that Dane begins to interact with the music, stretching rhythm, arpeggiating the left hand. These intuitive triggers in Dane's response to what he's hearing are all coming about because of the registration and because of the sound that he's hearing, the sound of the instrument in the space. We can all acknowledge the real value of opening the floodgates this way and letting all kinds of artists from different spaces, creative spaces, interact with the organ. The advantage to the virtual technology is that it makes that very easy to do. We can set up a virtual platform and allow instrumentalists from all spaces, in a school, in an institution, to engage the instrument in a very easy and mobile way. So what this allows us to do, it allows us to create more access points that are faster to set up, faster to take down, less expensive to provide. And all of that doesn't require anyone to have a ticket to access. This removes barriers. This creates a space where there is more potential for more creative people to interact with the organ in more ways. I hope you're curious about how we can remove barriers to access and what happens when we do that. Join me in Chapter 2 when we'll talk about how to leverage technology for creative expression.